Greetings, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, lads and lads. Welcome to the Rally with Racquet podcast. Welcome you all here once again, the RWR crew. Hello, how are you all today? Whether it be the morning, midday, evening, or gamer hours. But hope you guys are all faring well. Now, of course, if you haven't been introduced to Rally with Racquet before, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief introduction as to what this series entails. It is basically any given subject that I do feel like talking about. It could be with a guest, it could be by myself. This will be uploaded once a week, and I just ramble on any given subject that I decide to take out, or maybe it is a recommendation and talk about it for a little bit. Of course, this is a general given. Episodes by myself will be a little bit shorter. Of course, with multiple people, one other person is a lot easier to bounce off and have much longer episodes. But depending on the topic, the length will vary from, half an hour to an hour by myself. So we'll see how that ends up going, depending on the subject, how much information I have on it, yada yada yada. You guys clicked on this video for this reason. This is going to be an AEW sort of centric episode, or a wrestling type episode, and my thoughts on the Dave Meltzer versus Jim Cornette sort of fiasco that was out on Twitter. Jim Cornette having a little bit of a rant on his YouTube channel as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. Who's in the right, who's in the wrong? Is there some middle ground to stay in that conversation? We'll dissect a little bit of that later on. Either way, let's get straight into it, I suppose. What are my initial thoughts on AEW? Now, this is really difficult for me because I'm 20 years old. I wasn't initially around for the WCW versus WWE sort of rivalry, and I wasn't watching wrestling at that age. I'm not exactly even sure what time period that was, but forgive me about that. So, either way, the point is, this is my first time of people have been relating a rivalry directly with WWE. So in terms of judging how good a company is, do you judge it based on what they're advertising? Do you judge them based on how they are directly to their competitor? Do you judge them sort of less harshly because they are just starting up, or do you go on the other side and judge them more harshly because they are going to be that challenger towards something, right? Towards WWE or whatever it may be. It's a difficult one to outline. What is the main primary criteria that I can highlight to really give you guys insight as to what I'm thinking? And it's a little bit of a mixture, some things, of course, because they are a new company, you can let them slip away with certain stuff, but at the end of the day, if, they do want to be a competitor, I know this is something that AEW staff or people who are participating or wrestlers in AEW said that they don't want to compete with WWE. Some think they do want to, it's a mixed sort of bag in that regard, but I think at the end of the day, they want to produce the best product possible, and if they can produce the best product possible and it reaches the mainstream audience, then maybe in a few years' time they can rival WWE, but at the moment it's going to be very difficult, obviously. So we're going to sort of, not going to be too harsh, but we'll try and analyze some aspects of basic storytelling within some of their feuds and relating them to WWE, the Dave Meltzer versus Jim Cornette sort of fiasco, and how that sort of can relate to some of the points that I'll make too. And this is going to be the first point I'm actually going to dip into for AEW versus WWE. This is going to be a sort of general and broad point, and it is something that's speaking from personal experience too, and it's kayfabe. Now, AEW in some circumstances, with a lot of or some of their characters and how gimmicky they are, make it very obvious that wrestling is fake. Now, of course, this immediately would trigger Jim Cornette. I mean, he's been very vocal on characters like Orange Cassidy, which he labels Pockets. He calls Joey Janela Joey Nutella or whatever. And he has been vocal about, the very first Royal Rumble that they made with a lot of the gimmicks they had in there, relating it to sort of, if there are a lot of gimmicks, then there are no gimmicks, because everyone in that Royal Rumble, well, not everyone, a lot of them were gimmicks, so it didn't really, give that sort of gimmick effect. It's like the saying, if everyone's tall, there are no giants, are there? So I can understand where Jim Cornette's coming from in that sort of scenario. And there are a little bit of inconsistencies when it comes to AEW and their seriousness. One of the things that Jim Cornette, in my opinion, one of his main flaws is when he sees something that he doesn't like, he will continuously judge that person based on something that he saw of it. So one of the main examples for Kenny Omega, for example, that he likes to harp on is when he wrestled a Japanese schoolgirl. This was a very long time ago. And every time, when he reviews Kenny Omega, I feel like he has that sort of thing at the back of his mind every time he's relating back to it. And as a result, I think he unfairly criticizes him, and he does this for plenty of the wrestlers. He has this sort of unfair prejudice towards certain people, which makes him seem a little bit more biased towards certain things. And don't get me wrong, because I actually agree with a lot of what Jim Cornette says. Like, I think Kenny Omega, for example, is too animated, and everything that he does in relation to, like, he calls him jazz hands, which I find pretty funny, to be honest, can get you sort of out of the scene, out of it feels like the curtains are pulled. It feels like you're watching a show rather than an actual wrestling match, which I feel like, for someone who AEW are promoting as their top or brand guy, Kenny Omega, that sort of gimmicky thing shouldn't be given to someone like him, or he shouldn't be doing that himself, because I'm pretty sure that decision to do that would be based on Kenny Omega, knowing from how much individual sort of impact that a lot of these guys have. If they say something, they can do it in the match. They don't have to go through 70 different people in order to get something over. Or not get something over, like get something, give it into the match so they can actually perform it. It seems obvious that a lot of these guys are trying to perform, and which, on the topic of kayfabe, it feels like the curtains are being unveiled and it doesn't look real. Now, this something has been confirmed from like a few of like my family members, for example, like when my stepsister like was watching whatever, she thought it was like a dance routine. When my grandfather used to watch wrestling, he used to really, really like the big, bulky guys, and whenever he saw someone who was really skinny or unbelievable, he would actually like change the channel. Now, this is something that I feel like the old people, I'm not going to label this as older people, like older generation will have the same sort of opinion as Jim Cornette, I feel. Because they do want to have that more sort of believable aspect of, oh, this guy's a badass or whatever, and they don't like the sort of comedic values in wrestling. I do tend to like the comedic values if it is within reason, if it's funny, it's not gimmicky or stupid. So, there are a ton of variables when it comes to this sort of things. Apologies, because my throat, I feel like, is stretching every single muscle to talk today, and every time I talk there is a little bit of pain. But we'll continue through to the podcast, because this is something that I've been wanting to do for a little bit, and we'll muscle through. So anyway, I do agree with Jim Cornette in one sense, and I do think he's overly harsh in the other sense. For people like Joey Janela, I think he's someone who has potential, and shouldn't be outcasted because of his look. Sure, I feel like, if you're a professional wrestler or a professional athlete, unless it's like tied to your gimmick, you're doing this for a living. If you're doing stuff to be athletic, you should probably work on being athletic too. I mean, it just seems like an element of your craft. If you're, playing tennis, you want to work on your backhand and forehand to be as consistent as possible. You want to be physically fit and look great. You don't see many fat players, or the tennis tour, they all are incredibly fit. I feel like Now, this is something that has been advertised for AEW, so this isn't, just random criteria coming out of my mouth. If you're making a sort of sports presentation as AEW was to be advertised as, with the statistics and numbers and serious feuds, then you want your athletes to be in top shape, which sort of contradicts a lot of what AEW initially standard for, and what AEW is continuing to do. And now, in my opinion, actually, I still watch AEW every week because I'm intrigued. I'm interested to see what these guys have, because they do have sort of a lot of gold in their roster too. Like MJF is going to be one of the most talented wrestlers and talkers on TV. Chris Jericho is magic. John Moxley's fantastic. I feel like they have a few mid card guys that have some potential too. Scorpio Sky is really good. I feel like they should do something with him. Like, they have a bunch of talented guys, it's just they don't have these guys in consistently week in, week out, because they have, like, these weird fringe matches that don't make sense and doesn't get over, you know what I mean? And this is something that AEW need to try and figure out. I mean, AEW arguably have the weakest roster of women in the history of wrestling. From what I've at least spectated, it's been absolutely awful to watch their women's division. It's been mind-numbingly boring and doesn't seem to have any consistent storylines, and their, monsters feel like the weakest in the division somehow, for some reason, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, sure, we've been taught for WWE to make monsters look a bit like devastating, and they win a lot. I mean, as much of a stereotype as that is, I feel like that should be like the view for these bigger women, right? They should be dominant, and they should be trying to giving these women a lot more wins, because it's believable with their size and their strength and stuff. And if there's reasonable, ways that they can get them to lose, sure, a surprise roll-up or them getting knocked out for a miscellaneous reason, but some of these losses have been clean too, which has been quite ridiculous. So yeah, I mean, just going into a little bit more detail versus the Jim Cornette and Dave Meltzer, I mean, one of the main reasons why this sort of sparked the debate was because of the Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair rivalry, and then referring it to Kenny Omega versus Okada. Now, this is that feud, in my opinion, was fantastic. The Kenny Omega versus Okada feud, I believe it was Okada. It was amazing to watch. I watched all matches, and both were incredible athletes. Now, there were a lot of moves done, as Jim Cornette would say, but in Japan, I feel like it's more necessary for that to happen rather than AEW, as weird as it sounds, because, once again, bringing back the criteria of AEW is supposed to be recognized as a sport, a statistical, factual type wrestling thing, when in reality there's something different. With Japanese, there is a lot more like playing to the crowd and stuff like that, and I feel like Kenny Omega and Okada filled that niche really, really well, and has produced one of the best spectacles in wrestling history as a result of that. Did have some mind games because of how long the feud lasted for. I believe it lasted for a few years. If I'm not, someone correct me if that's wrong. So it did have a lot of those elements. And will this develop for the Western culture? I mean, it's debatable. We don't know yet. AEW's numbers, for the most part, have been beating NXT's, but, this is WWE's lower division. So that is to be expected or whatever. And AEW being the new thing, and how quickly social media spreads nowadays, is something good for the new age, I feel, and it is playing to their advantage. So good on them for being consistent in the social media avenue, and they're being very active in that regard too. It's just, they need to sort of adjust a few of the guys that they have in there, make the system a little bit more believable. I'm not saying cut out, like, for example, I think Orange Cassidy is someone who's actually quite unique, and you can have him in now and again because it is over with the local crowd, I think. The Baby Oil guy is a little bit weird. I mean, Nakazawa, as I believe that his name is. Like, they have a lot of these guys. You just don't want to make sure that it gets over flooded with gimmicky characters, because we don't want to be in a situation much similar to the first Royal Rumble that they had, where you have too many gimmicks, and as a result of that, none of them become gimmicks. They will just become like, it just turns into a clown show at that point. So, we've been seeing a lot of criticism from me so far, but overall, is the show still entertaining to watch? Yeah, it is, because it is, whether you like it or not, a fresh experience. And each match, because they have so many different characters on their roster, feels a lot more different. And their storylines with the top guys are very, very easy to follow. With the middle cards and the lower cards, there isn't really much to sort of look at, but at least with the top feuds that they have at the moment, it's easy to follow on a week-to-week basis. Where in WWE, it is very difficult to track. I mean, and with WWE, it is much more predictable as well. With, this guy's going to win this week, and then the next week he's going to lose a 50-50 booking. We're going to have 4, cover-up finishes. We're going to have disqualifications all the time. Like, WWE like to dig themselves out of holes by making non-official wins, by, like, winning clean all the time, getting so many surprise roll-ups and disqualifications. It just doesn't feel like a contest anymore. It feels like you're just stretching around the rules all the time. Like, it feels really, really annoying. It's awful. They still have a lot of great stars within that WWE roster, but, like, relating back to AEW, they do have some growing room, I believe, and I feel like if they just remain consistent and they keep on forwarding the product that they have advertised, or if they don't have that sort of advertisement or anymore, then at least try to, refurbish how you were advertising in the first place. Say we're going to have, like, a lot more of these gimmick matches, we're going to have a lot of different superstars that we have in the roster that we can showcase for these particular reasons. It is a very diverse roster. I can definitely give them that. They do work off the diversity quite well. With a bunch of short people, you have a bunch of big people, you have blacks people, you have Asian people, you have white people, you have people who are going through the transitioning period, gay people. You have a wide variety of different people within the roster to make sure that it sort of resonates with some of the mainstream audience. Like, that's one of the ways that AEW have targeted the audience in trying to have these individual characters that may represent some of people in the wider array of the communities, which I think is quite cool that they're electing to do that. They even have someone who doesn't have any legs who participated in a wrestling match. I don't expect them to be doing this all the time, just for the sake of it and say, oh, we're inclusive. It's just good that that's sort of in place. Anyway, right? But as a general product, AEW, in my opinion, is fine. Out of everything that I said, it sort of contradicts it, right? But as I said, their diversity works for them. The fact that they are a little bit surprising each and every week, like, because it is a new product. Maybe if AEW was running for however long WWE was, we'd be saying that this shit was absolutely garbage and trash, depending on, like, the amount of stuff they repeat. And it just depends, right? It's contextual. This is a new company. It is on fire, whether you like it or not. And there are reasons to love and to hate it. Objectively, not objectively, in my opinion, they have some silly bullshit stuff that shouldn't be on Prime TV. In my opinion, people are way too harsh on certain aspects, and people that have tons of talent there are being neglected. So they have some breathing room, they have some room to work with. Just so long as they try to keep more mid-card feuds active. The top guys seem to be getting good action, which, yeah, of course, that's supposed to happen. I'm really happy that you have John Moxley, Chris Jericho and stuff leading the charge in that aspect, MJF, Cody Rhodes. But we need to have sort of other guys that can guard that mid-card, and still do fantastic job. Like Paige is a good example of someone who needs to be utilized. Kenny Omega needs to be utilized in a proper fashion without looking like a musician. Scorpio Sky, as I mentioned. The guy with the face paint, I forgot his name. You know what I'm talking about. I even think Joey Janela has like potential in sort of Matt or Jeff Hardy type gimmick, there are tons of things that they can learn, and they're bringing on a few industry experts to help them. I'm sure that they'll be giving a bit of advice. I feel like Mr. Ross won't be on the commentary team for very much longer. I don't feel like he seems comfortable within that environment. I feel like he's undersold talent a variety of times. He's mispronounced certain things. He sounds disinterested sometimes within the product, and I don't think he'll be re-signing after his contract expires, especially with how he sort of has been vocal on he likes the sports representation within wrestling, and that's one of the main reasons he didn't keep in contact with the WWE in the first place, because they look towards more the entertainment module. So I think Ross probably won't be staying with AEW too longer because of that, and that will hurt the announce team, but I'm pretty sure they can probably find something. I mean, Golden Boy as well, he's done a little bit of AEW, a fellow esports person. Hopefully maybe he gets some gigs or whatever. But yeah, it's been a wild ride so far in AEW. Adam Page is also a good person who they can transition up. Like, there's just a bunch of potential, right? And I think we all want to see these guys succeed, because if these guys succeed, I think they will make WWE better too. They'll make all the wrestling better, and they're trying to cater towards a modern audience, which I understand, because if we're being very realistic here, contrary to what I've been saying, you can't have like a massive old school type wrestling presentation like, for example, the NWA has, right? This isn't going to get over with everyone because it's too old school. There's not enough flair. There's not enough modernization to it. It doesn't feel modern enough. There needs to be sort of changes and hinges of these type of things. You look at NWA being as the old school type thing, WWE being the sort of entertainment, and AEW being a modernized gimmick version. Like, it's very difficult. There are fine lines. NXT, I think, tries to portray a serious product as well, but they're also in line with the WWE, so they get a little bit less sort of flack for that. But either way, man, it's been like pretty good to... I've said this like 4 times, and then I get into a separate topic. I think for AEW, we'll just leave it there for now. Jim Cornette and Dave Meltzer have had a little bit of a meltdown on Twitter. I think their friendship has ended over this sort of debate. They both have their right and wrong points, I feel. Like, they're both biased towards their things extremely. Dave Meltzer, when it comes to being good with dates, being good with... he's really the wrestling historian. Jim Cornette is really good at acknowledging what is sort of traditional, what is realistic, and he understands a lot of the foundation and basic values of wrestling. And sometimes when something new happens, he doesn't quite understand it, and as a result, he gets angry. So there are a lot of things to dissect out of that sort of debate that those guys were having. I know Ricky Steamboat and... something Steamboat, I forgot his first name, and Ric Flair was recognized as the spectacle of wrestling, the World Wrestling Federation, and it stands still with that, with history. And when Dave Meltzer said that, sort of procked a trigger within Jim Cornette's brain, and this is something that Jim would hold dearly towards his heart with that match, particularly because of how old school it was and the storyline that was built with it and the psychology. And him relating it back to the Japanese match really offended Jim, and as a result, I think they just overreacted towards each other, especially Jim. So hopefully they can resolve that, and they both have their inherent biases, and hopefully they can move past that and be a little bit more objective. So, getting past that, guys, let's talk a little bit about NXT and WWE. Now, NXT and WWE undoubtedly have fantastic women's divisions, and they're doing a fantastic job with their talent there. Like, Rhea Ripley has to be absolutely one of the hottest talents, not like physically. I mean, she is like hot, but like she is an amazing talent. She's on fire at the moment. She's over as heck, and she's going up against the greats, which is Charlotte Flair. Possibly going to happen. I think it will happen. There's a variety of different feuds happening at the moment, but there hasn't really been something consistent. Drew McIntyre being the person who's going to be going against Brock Lesnar, and I think he's adapted this sort of new, not comedic, but sort of heroic, with a little bit of a comedic element on the side. I really do dig that. There are a lot of good and bad things happening with WWE at the moment. To me, the why WWE is copping the most flack is because they don't. Every time they have someone who needs to be pushed, they don't push them, and then they push them when it's too late. I mean, why does Braun Strowman have the Universal Championship, the Intercontinental Belt, whatever it's called now? Why did he win that? Like, he's been irrelevant for so long for what WWE have done to him. Like, they've given him the Andre the Giant Royal Rumble, he hasn't done anything else. He's won a tag team championships with a kid. He has to have one of the worst sort of resumes for a monster who was incredibly hot for so long, and then all of a sudden they give him the belt when he's not really relevant anymore, because WWE are apparently working within a different dimension where they receive all of the different criticisms a year later. This has happened on several occasions with talent. I mean, I don't know what they've done with Shorty G. I mean, that is got to be the most pointless transition I've ever seen. Baron Corbin remains to be very, very annoying, and the feud between him and Roman has gone, I feel like, for an eternity. There are so many things within WWE. I mean, let's be honest, WWE has the best roster out of any lineup by far. They have a ridiculous amount of talent, which inherently makes it more difficult for them to organize all of these things, right? But there are certain people who do not win at all, and you can just predict what is going to happen to them every single time. Why do you have one of your most talented wrestlers by far on the roster? And this guy is one of the most classical examples of being a wrestler. Cesaro, he never wins. It's ridiculous. Cesaro never wins, and all these these high flyer guys, they always win by surprise roll-ups. They can never ever get a clean finish. It's ridiculous. WWE are becoming so annoying with how they book things, and it just infuriates a lot of people because they know how much potential these guys have. A monopoly on the whole wrestling business, and they still are very, very, very slow on using their talent. They have things that last for ages and somehow manage to do nothing with them. Aleister Black, knock on my door. Fight me. He's fought like two people. What is this shit? Aleister Black, someone who has transitioned from a top spot on NXT onto the main roster, has done nothing. He had a fantastic feud with Buddy Murphy, or Murphy now, as he's called. And then all of a sudden nothing happens after that. Nothing happens. And that feud just showed you how much deep of a talent pool WWE has, because those guys slated with their matches. They're absolutely phenomenal, right? The selling, the kicks, the punches, the realistic, the artistic, wonderful accuracy, precision with the strikes, some submission. They were doing a fantastic job. They are doing stuff better now. They're getting up and down, up and down. I like the thing that they're doing with Seth Rollins. They've rebooted Seth Rollins in a very good way. How he has, the I forgot the tag team's name. The AOP, the Authors of Pain, and Murphy with them, and it seems like a really cool group. I really enjoy that heel group. I think they're fantastic at what they do. Seth is better as a heel. He's annoying and he gets under your skin. That's why he should have been a heel. But they still need to stop doing the shit with Roman Reigns, man, and Baron Corbin. Just stop it. It's been absolutely ridiculous. You have so many people talented on your roster. What happened with Shelton Benjamin? What happens with Sami Zayn? What happens with Cesaro? What happens with Aleister Black? What happens with Buddy Murphy? Like, these guys are your future. Hopefully they can still play with their guns. I mean, they still have Bray Wyatt, probably one of the hottest wrestling prospects at the moment. And the women's division is undoubtedly fantastic. So if WWE continue to work off those things, I feel like they can still remain to be at the top. But, a couple of their corporate guys ended up leaving. Their stocks ended up going down as a result of that. And, the viewership has been declining. The viewers, or not viewers, I should say, the spectators live at the events have been declining. The seats haven't been exactly filled to the brim as they used to. The studios, the pyros, they're having to recycle old talent back into the roster because they're clueless as to what they want to do narratively. They're just in a very bad spot at the moment, WWE. I mean, how many times have we seen this revamping stage within the past 2 years, and it just feels like they're doing the same shit over again. Paul Heyman had some fantastic ideas, and you could tell every single Raw when you could see Paul Heyman's influence, but then you could see every single Raw, where you could see that Heyman's tried to do something and it's been overwritten, and as a result it looks a lot worse. It's been PG-atized, So yeah, I could go on this rant for a while now, but I would have made a longer episode of this sort of AEW and WWE talk, but my throat feels like it is operating on a bagpipe at the moment. You know how like a bagpipe just goes like woo woo woo. Was that? No, it's not a bagpipe. Fuck it. I don't know, the thing that goes like this when you squish it. I just saw it in The Symptoms one day. I don't know. I need to get away for this. All right. Well, anyway, everyone, this has been me, Racquet, Rally with Racquet podcast. If you guys do have any thoughts, please let me know in relation to the topic. We'll have one out next week. Not sure what the topic will be, but we'll get one out anyway. So thank you guys for watching this, and have a good day or night wherever you may hail from. See ya.